He's reached the pinnacle of power, first on Wall Street and then in politics. He rose to the top of Goldman Sachs only to be ousted in a brutal power play. And he spent millions to be elected New Jersey governor, only to be rejected by voters after one term. And now his latest venture has ended in bankruptcy and questions about a missing $1 billion. Today, Jon Corzine fights for his reputation and possibly his freedom.
I simply do not know where the money is or why the accounts have not been reconciled to date.
Tonight, a Bloomberg special, Jon Corzine, Boom and Bust. Good evening, I'm Lisa Murphy, reporting from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. Tonight, we are taking an in-depth look at Jon Corzine, former senator, governor, and Wall Street titan. After New Jersey voters rejected his bid for second term as governor, he took over a sleepy futures brokerage called MF Global, and he sought to transform it into a financial powerhouse. Now, he personally ordered a $6.5 billion bet on European sovereign bonds, and as the debt crisis there exploded, the ground fell out from under him. Well, he lost the confidence of creditors, the ratings agencies, and then his investors. As much as $1.5 billion in customer funds may have been lost. And so 5 weeks ago, Corzine resigned and MF Global filed for bankruptcy. The question now, where is the missing money? That takes us to today. Corzine spoke publicly for the first time since the downfall of the firm. He testified for more than 3 hours before a House panel investigating MF's collapse. Bloomberg's Sheila Dharmarajan has been on Capitol Hill since early this morning. She's been covering this story for us from the very beginning. Sheila, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you too, Lisa, and what a day it has been. Jon Corzine, former CEO of MF Global, taking the stand, testifying about his involvement in the 8th largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. Now, he did not take the 5th as was widely expected. Instead, he answered every single question that was put forth to him and also published a 21-page document early this morning with a set of published public remarks. Now, there were plenty of topics that were touched upon throughout the testimony, but at the heart of it, what did Corzine know, or what did he have to do with the missing $1.2 billion in missing client funds? Now, Corzine came out and said he simply did not know where the money was. He did not know what happened to it. In fact, he also said that he only knew about the missing funds just a day before the firm declared bankruptcy. But when it came to the potential misuse of the funds, so we're talking about the commingling of client funds with MF Global's house fund, Jon Corzine had a very carefully worded answer. Remember, there is still a criminal investigation pending into the downfall of MF Global. Take a listen.
I never intended to break any rules, whether it dealt with the segregation rules or any of the other rules. I never intended to authorize anyone. I know I had no intention to ever authorize the transfer of segregated monies.
So making it very clear that he had no misintentions when it came to those missing client funds, and also making it very clear that he did not have a lot of knowledge about the day-to-day operations or the trading mechanisms of the firm. In fact, he said he has not had time to review the wealth of documents throughout this process. There are still thousands of emails and documents that he needs to go through, and also that he really doesn't know the minutiae of the day-to-day tradings of the firm. Take a listen.
As the Chief Executive Officer of the MF Global Holding Company, I ultimately had overall responsibility for the firm. I did not, however, generally involve myself in the mechanics of the clearing and settlement of trades or in the movement of cash and collateral.
So he accepts full responsibility as CEO of the firm, and specifically, he said he also accepts full responsibility for pushing the firm towards risky European debts. In fact, he said he was an advocate of the strategy, thinking that it would be a way for MF Global to boost its profitability. Lisa, I want to quickly touch upon the regulatory issues, because that was really what this morning's testimony was focused on. CFTC under fire as well, saying they should have had more oversight of the downfall of MF Global. Of course, this is just the beginning of Jon Corzine's testimony. He is scheduled to testify 2 more times in front of Congress, Lisa.
All right, busy times certainly for the former CEO of MF Global. Thanks so much, Sheila. Good to see you again. Bloomberg's Sheila Dharmarajan coming to us from D.C., where she has been tracked all of the testimony today. Well, Congressman Frank Lucas of Oklahoma is the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee that was questioning Corzine. Well, I talked with him after today's session and asked if he was satisfied with Corzine's answers.
clearly we've learned that we have a chief executive officer, a former chief executive officer, who doesn't want to take responsibility for much of anything. And when you match that up with what we heard from our earlier panels, that clearly there's $1.2 billion of segregated monies that have disappeared. When we heard that same first panel tell us there was basically no legal way that money could have been shifted from the future side of MF Global over to the security side.
Now, Corzine's response to various forms of that same question about the $1.2 billion in missing client funds was that he was not aware of anything being done to actually take those client funds out. Were you not convinced that he wasn't aware?
I was very impressed with the former chief executive officer of MF Global's performance. But the fact of the matter was, he never directly answered any of the questions. He never took direct responsibility for anything. He said he had to have more information. He would take time to put it together. I tell you, there are thousands of entities out there who are waiting for their $1.2 billion who'd like to know what happened to that money. And this is from a very successful individual who's been a captain of the financial industries in this country, who suddenly, well, ultimately there are 2 more committees, and I suspect there are a number of federal agencies who will investigate this, and when the audits are in, the facts will come together and we'll all know together. I just wish we'd had some more precise answers today.
Now, one suggestion he did make, and this is something we had been discussing with a professor from Columbia Law School earlier, was that perhaps some of those missing client funds are in fact still collateral that is being held by banks with which MF Global had been engaged in repo transactions. Is that something you will pursue after this point?
The committee will continue to investigate, to work with the other committees on this responsibility. Our goal ultimately is to try to make the end users, the people who were affected by the failure, whole again. We're going to go from every perspective. I hope that is correct. I hope the money turns up. But after today, you have to be very pessimistic.
Were there any, did you have any sense from the conversation or questions with Jill Summers as to how this could have fallen through the cracks with the CFTC?
Well, that's the basic issue. We discussed the daily reports that are supposed to be provided that demonstrate how the segregated funds are handled. But the bottom line really came through was that they had to take MF Global's word for it, and only when discrepancies appeared or there were revised reports did all the warning bells go off. As I said, there's a reason that the committee had to compel the former senator to come speak to us. He clearly was prepared for that. We clearly have gained from the other entities involved that the problems are real. Someone misappropriated billions, at least billion, of the funds from the future side of MF Global, and it remains to be seen where it's gone, and that has to be decided. And it will all be sorted out. This is the first public step in a long process that hopefully will clarify everything, and the appropriate responses will rest with those who made the decisions that led to this situation.
Do you know any more about what happened today than you did yesterday before these hearings?
We know that money's missing. We know that, in my opinion, based on the comments of the witnesses, that it could not have been legally transferred in a way that led to its disappearance. We know that the primary responsible individuals in the organization don't want to take responsibility at this point, and all this will be sorted out. It will take time. It will take the auditors and the investigators and various agencies of the federal government, but it will be sorted out. The facts will come out.
Do you plan at this point to subpoena anyone else in relation to what happened with MF Global?
We're going to finish the hearing set here today. We're going to digest the information. We're going to look at what our sister committee in the Senate is doing and our fellow subcommittee over on financial services, and proceed from there. This is not a one-shot hearing. This is not a one-event occurrence.
All right, where does John Corzine end up now? Could he face criminal charges for the debacle at MF Global? We're going to ask our panel of experts. That's coming up after the break on our special report, John Corzine, Boom and Bust.
You know, greed. This did not have to be this way.
I would punch him in the face, I swear. I would. If not take him elsewhere, where it hurt even more.
Well, some former MF Global employees weren't holding back on their opinion of John Corzine, but do members of Congress still hold Corzine responsible? Well, they heard an earful today from a man who has a history of risk-taking on Wall Street, and that raises the question, did Corzine risk his freedom by not taking the fifth? We're going to turn to our panel of guests. I'm joined by Bloomberg contributing editor Bill Cohen. Always good to see you, Bill. Bill interviewed Corzine many times for his latest book, Money and Power, How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World. We also have former federal prosecutor Neil Barofsky here. He sent former Refco CEO Philip Bennett to prison for fraud in connection with the collapse of that firm. And Bloomberg Television's Stephanie Ruhle is also joining us for a very long day. Actually, Neil and Stephanie were on from early this morning talking about this.
We've been together all day.
All right, well, one thing I want to get to right off the bat is the notion of not taking the fifth. Was that a brilliant PR move on his part, or do you think he's ultimately going to suffer for part of that testimony?
I think the answer is both. I think it would have been devastating from a PR perspective to stand up there and take the fifth question after question after question. But I think the flip side of that is that he may have severely prejudiced himself if this case does end up turning into a criminal case. He has really straitjacketed any potential defense by laying out his theory of what happened. And he had a lot of caveats today, and he sort of covered it with a lot of, this is my best recollection. But the bottom line is he's going to have a hard time deviating from the story that he told today.
Bill, given your knowledge of him as a man, you know him as a risk taker, certainly.
Definitely.
Did you think he appeared calm under fire today?
Yeah, some people who are powerful people, when it really gets tough under pressure, and he has said this to me. He said to me that when you have your come to Jesus moment, when you're faced with a trade that's not going right, and you have a come to Jesus moment, that's when you have to get calm, cool, and collected and go about your business and unwind it or resolve it. I thought today he was very calm. He did not look particularly well. I think he looked a little peaked. But on the other hand, you got to give him credit for, as Neil was saying, coming out, not taking the fifth, saying what he believed happened. It's his theory of the case. We'll see if it stands up. But I think this is a perfect example of him being able to be calm under an incredible amount of pressure. And he's going to have another chance to do it, 2 more chances to do it next week, too.
But doesn't providing all of this information, isn't it just fodder for the next two? They're ready. They know everything he has to say, and now they're getting ready for chapters 2 and 3?
I think you saw some not the most well-prepared members of Congress today. I think some of them may have been banking on him taking the Fifth Amendment. Maybe some of them didn't have the best command of the material and some of the intricacies of the business model. I think there should be a lot less of that for the next 2 hearings. They now have the transcript. They're able to walk through it. They should be able to understand the answers and be a little bit more directed in their questions. It should be a higher quality hearing, which would not necessarily be good news for John Corzine.
I would wonder, though, are they going to have access to documents? The email trail of who said what to whom at various times. What do we do? I mean, there's got to be something that says take these funds from these accounts and do that kind of thing. I would just imagine that there had to be.
Well, this brings me to my point, right? Out of today's testimony, basically what we heard were these were bad bets, perhaps bad judgment, but was there anything that indicated fraud? And there were 3 main areas in which he was being questioned. One was European bets, or the bets on European sovereign debt, right? There was also the issue of the lobbying blitz of the CFTC and his relationship with the CFTC. And then last, of course, I can't say but not least, I mean, this was probably the biggest issue, was the commingling of the funds. On those 3 areas, did he indicate in any way that he could be guilty of fraud?
Well, look, the making the bet on the European